All right, Marcus. So we're here to talk a little bit about the high elbow catch today. We're going to take a look at some
Got
freestyle
it.
examples and kind of break it down. You
Got
and I
it.
are both going to share a couple of
Cool.
examples and just take a look at some of the different nuances between the high elbow catch, some of the different things people could consider, and some of the things that we're looking for in terms of how to improve it and just get the most propulsion out of your stroke.
High elbow catch when I come and jump into it. I think it's the one key thing which a lot of swimmers can do a lot, like a big change in their technique and also in the propulsion as such. So for me, that is the first point I want to go at. Obviously, coordination is one of the and breathing and all these things are important too. But I think where there is a difference, the maximum stroke or the maximum distance per stroke you do. And one thing which is what I see the most is the high elbow catch, which is missing, or there they lose, like the beginner or the triathlete misses out a lot on the high elbow catch, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's been suggested that some of the biggest advances in competitive swimming have been in athletes developing a more propulsive and accelerated hand speed with their catch and their pull. So, like you said, this is the most propulsive phase of the stroke. It's really what propels you forward. And I think a lot of swimmers often forget that the goal is to go forward, and we really want to be directing water backwards so that we can drive our bodies forward. And a lot of what we understand about drag and streamline and some of the front end stuff has not really changed, but we're learning a lot, and particularly with underwater video and some of the technology we have of what we can see under the water and how we get into that position. I guess to kick off, how would you define a high elbow catch or this early vertical forearm that a lot of people talk about?
For me, the definition of the high elbow catch is really that you catch the water at the earliest point when after entering the water if you have with your hand, and that would be the definition where it starts. And then obviously catching the water that at the earliest point in time, you would then try to pull. Try to have constant pressure on your hand, um, with the least effort applied to your overall stroke technique, I think. If
Yeah.
that makes certainly sense. But as you said, I mean, this is something which I saw in videos of yours or in others' videos when you talked about it, or when I talked about it. And recently, just a new swimmer or a young swimmer came to me and said, "Look, you need to think about when a ball is pushed backwards, or when you push it backwards. For me, that is normal. For you too, but for other people is not. So I think that is the point where a lot of people go wrong. And what I also think is that a lot of people try to how can I say it, to balance out other mistakes they do in the stroke with their starting phase of the stroke, which is actually our own nature to do that. But if we would just concentrate on that high elbow catch and try to grab the water as early as we can and push it backwards, that would solve a lot of problems, I think. I mean, that's from my side. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of the issues we see with swimmers is you're in an unstable surface and you're looking for balance. And a lot of people are always trying to get out of the water. So what we see, a common mistake is they're pushing down on the water too much because they're trying to rise up out of the water. And it goes back to my point earlier, we're trying to move forward. So to your point, if to define early vertical forearm or high elbow catch is after the entry and extension phases, we're looking to get the fingertips below the elbow as soon as possible out front here, and that motion is initiated at the elbow. So I'm entering the water, and as we see in this still frame of me swimming freestyle right now, the first position I want to get into is setting catch, and we're going to do that by getting the fingertips pointing down towards the pool or the bottom, getting the elbow up, and it's this bend at the elbow. So to use your analogy of a ball, if we can imagine a ball behind my arm right now, I want to drive that ball or drive that water straight back. So if we look at my other arm, it's bending at the elbow as soon as possible out in front. I want to catch water with my hand and my forearm and use my forearm as a paddle to paddle water straight back. My forearm is vertical. It doesn't mean your elbow is all the way up at the surface, but it means it's above your hand. and you're using your forearm vertically as a paddle to paddle water straight back so that you go straight forward.
Exactly. I mean, this is the theory of doing it, but I see a lot of swimmers it will go wrong, or when something happens, is especially when they start. So maybe they have the hand, but then they, instead of turning the elbow up, they let the elbow drop, and so the elbow drops down, so they can't really continue their movement, and then they just lose everything out on that, and just trying to get the hand behind to sort of the high elbow again. So usually what I use to explain this situation or this moment to get into the high elbow catch is with getting out of the water. So when you get you're on the line or on the side of the pool and you get out of the water, you would never put your hands up, keep your elbows down, and pull yourself up like looking out. You come to a point where you can't do it anymore. What you do in this moment, you literally, like, you try to move your elbows up and then push yourself out. And the other analogy, which, like, in comparison to that, I would always keep the elbows high, even when I pull myself up. Instead of having it below my hands, I would keep it on the same level or above, so I can actually start to push myself out of the water. And this is usually what helps the people to understand what I'm trying to say, and also ultimately then reflects in them to understand what they need to do better in the water, I think. So there usually the motion is, in my opinion, well described. How do you get out of the water? For me, being a long distance swimmer, for me it's all about optimization, having the longest stroke you can with the least effort possible, right? If you're a sprinter, that can be a bit different. I mean, when we look at people like Michael Klim or the likes, the high elbow catch is not really, it is a center point, but it's not that much centric, because there it's more about speed of the arm stroke itself, like speed of the movement itself of the stroke. It's more of a propeller than of what I do when I do long distance. I mean, you are the sprinter here. I'm not. You would know that a bit better. I think our technique is also in that sense a bit different to each other, I think.
Yeah. Just to make a distinction from like a dryland standpoint, from a strength and conditioning standpoint, you're kind of using the analogy of like a pull up, which is more elbow driven and is still using the shoulders and the lats, versus a muscle up, which is going to be more of this internally rotated high elbow position where you're creating torque here and then pressing down. So it'd be like a
Exactly.
muscle up in the gym, or your analogy of pressing yourself up out of the pool is the high elbow position that we're looking for when we swim freestyle. And while like pull-ups and lat pull-downs are really terrific dryland exercises for developing the lats and learning how to use your shoulder, that's not the position we're going to use in the water. And I'm often kind of defending these 2 points, because the pull-up is probably the number one thing you can do to increase your lat strength, which translates to the water. However, because the biomechanics are a little different in the gym, where load is much greater, there's a different strategy to do a pull-up than the same strategy that you're going to use in the water, where now we do want to get into this internally rotated position. We want to get the hand below the elbow, and we're going to do more of the muscle up or press up type pattern that you were describing, because the load is different and a lot less in the water, and the biomechanics are a little bit different. So while the two are complementary and we're going to train both, I think sometimes people look for like they look for like the most specific thing to train in the gym. And then they'll criticize pull-ups because it doesn't look like your stroke, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And to your point,
I get your point. Sorry if I jump in. I get your point, because this is something which in my time when I was a swimmer was not really, the expertise was not really on this, or it was, but not to that certain extent where you say now what you do in the gym, what you do outside. Whereas like both exercises, or let's say the pull-up, which you say that I pull up, which will be more beneficial, which also helps the same muscle ultimately. For changing your technique in the water, you would want to try to also, for the understanding, I think you would also try to imitate what you do in the water as well. Like, one is the training of it, and the other one is one is the training of the muscle, and the other one would be the training of the technique. I think that's two in my sense, you would need to keep it separate, as you say, as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important to make that distinction. And sometimes people muddy that distinction a little bit, and then they're
Yeah.
trying to make a pull-up look like the high elbow catch, and they're different. It's similar muscles, but they're different patterns. And it's helpful to use patterns to pattern the high elbow catch. And then in terms of getting strong and powerful, there's better ways to do that in the gym, which might look a little different, but they're complementary. And then to your point a moment ago of you do a lot of distance swimming, you do Ironman triathlon, 1.2 to 2.4 miles. I was more of a 50-yard sprinter. So what we're going to see here in a moment with my example is more of a straight elbow catch and using more of a high torque, long lever, almost propeller type of stroke as you were describing versus the high elbow catch. So I'm going to go ahead and play this in slow motion, and we'll take a look a little bit at it and talk about it a bit. So we just kind of go frame by frame here.
Yeah.
Again, it's a nice
Yeah.
extension. I'm long and streamlined. And then you'll see I come down on the water a little bit, and I don't get into that bent high elbow until maybe a third or a quarter of a way into my stroke.
But you also, in fairness, you here do the 2-beat kick. So you're trying to you take your short distance technique, which you have embedded in yourself, and combine it with a 2-beat kick, which you would, when you're sprinting, you would never do. You would always have a 6-beat kick and higher, and ultimately there the technique would match up with each other. Rather than when we come to later, when we see each other, like we see the video, other videos where we have the long distance swim. I think that is also distinguishing from your technique. I think that works too. I mean, you have water in your hands and you push it backwards. Um, um, because a lot of people could then say and look at this and think, oh, you know what, but your elbow is not really high either. And I say, as you explained it, no, it is, but it's more a straight version of it, as you are the sprinter type. But you're now combining this you take technique which you have with 2-beat kick, which is ultimately a long distance thing. Let's put it that way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I'm using a 2-beat kick here. So this is an efficient example, and it's just one way that I swim. My catch is typically this type of pattern, whether I'm sprinting or going slow, and I'm going to change the beat of my kick 2, 4, and 6 based on how fast I want to go and how long I want to go.
Yeah.
So there's some pros and cons to this more straight arm catch. This straight arm position is could produce faster speeds, but it requires more strength and there's more torque because the lever is longer on the shoulder. So it's require more torque and strength to produce that force, and you're not going to be able to sustain it as long. So, I was an average college sprinter who also did a lot of volume, kind of training with that high volume mentality. So I'm able to hang to a certain degree with distance. At a competitive level, I'm probably more competitive at the shorter sprint speeds. And from a world-class standpoint, there's probably some things that I could clean up here if I wanted to be a better sprinter or a better distance swimmer. But someone who's swimming for quite a long time at a fairly competitive level, this is an efficient pattern for me. There's some things that I'm continuing to try to progress and improve. But it's something that I developed and got me so far.
Yeah, no, but I see that. I certainly see that. This is the other version of how you do the catch, or at least one thing. One of my long-term coach, one thing which he always explained to me, and what was very important to him to tell me is, as what you said at the beginning of it, I can clearly put a ball to your hand, and once you have the catch, you will always push it backwards. Yes, I agree. This will take more energy here, but again, you always have the forward propulsion. You're not going to push yourself out of the water. This is usually what people do wrong, or what people are mistaken in the high elbow catch, or in that phase of the stroke. They try to push their body up, which they shouldn't do. As you said in the beginning, they should push themselves forward, and this certainly you do, especially on the right side. You can see much better. That is also, it's good. It's a good forward movement. If you would look at this video from the front, I would see that this is a straight line from the front to the back. I would always see that. And this is also what a lot of people mistaken, because as soon as I come off my middle line, some sort of, then you usually lose the pressure. Even in water, even if it's little and if you can't see it, but you lose the pressure, and then you lose also a bit out on the stroke itself, I think.
Yeah, several decades ago, we were teaching that S-type pull where we were trying to catch water in kind of an S pattern as we went through. And we just learned that it's more efficient to set catch and immediately be propelling water backwards to drive forward. So yes, if we were to look at this head on, I do have a very square, symmetrical, shoulder to shoulder, streamlined position. There's probably a little bit of inefficiency for the sake of speed with some downward movement of my hand, which I'd like to illustrate in a moment. Rather than a classic high elbow catch, which we can look at when we pull up a video view. But if we were to take a look at this with some of the annotation tools, to your point, we want to think about like this ball here. And if I just kind of scrub through this, I'm not quite grabbing the ball. So like I have a bit of a low elbow to start here, and there was some driving of the water down, but I'm going to get into this high elbow, maybe a little bit, probably right around here. And if we were to take this away and put the ball back, now I'm really going to catch that ball and throw it backwards. So I played a little bit of water polo, and I'm thinking of just the whole set and being able to grab that ball. Someone, sets the ball up front, the goal is behind me. I'm going to grab that ball and really scoop it backwards and throw it into the goal. That's another analogy for the water polo players listening to this, which we could think about as well. And if I were to just go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Go back to that moment, a bit more back. No, not this way, the other way, when you start the stroke. Yeah, here. But one thing which you need to know here is what is different to another swimmer or an amateur swimmer. When I look at your hand, the hand position in that moment is because the forward propulsion doesn't happen at your elbow. The forward propulsion happens at your hand, and your hand clearly shows me that you want to go forward instead of going upwards. Otherwise, it would be flatter. It would be more in line with the lines in the pool or with the lane above. No, it actually points towards the back. So it already leads the way where it needs to go. So you already have to catch, like you already have some catch. It could be better, but I guess this is a technical point of view and it's individual, but you already have water there. You're not losing it. And as you said before, it's kind of squared, so it's kind of straight. So as long as you keep the hand like this, you won't have a problem. If you see that you continue to have this, the video, you will see that you keep your hands like this until you actually a hand and your elbow have each other, and then you push it backwards, as you say, throwing the ball in the goal backwards, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if this were to just be a little bit more efficient, I'd be catching more of that water and pressure with my forearm as well, and not just using my hand. But to your point, I am very aware of keeping pressure on my hand, and that's a way for me to create stability and torque and pressing down on the water, and then I finally get into that scoop. And the point I wanted to make here with my catch is I could just set it a little earlier, actually. And sometimes when we look at the catch, we can look at it as drawing this line from the shoulder to the hand. And it would actually just be a little bit better if I could get my elbow in front of that line. So if it looked more like this second line than the first line, if we were to use a different color there. So we typically draw a straight line from the shoulder to the hand. And if I could, it would just be a little bit better if it were more like this. And getting that elbow in front of the red line out as soon as possible so that you can be catching water out front as early as possible, early vertical forearm, and be propelling water backwards as early as possible.
Yeah, I agree. But on the other hand, what I also see here, when I see the line, the red line, you will never have shoulder problems, which is also very important for the high elbow catch. People who drop their elbow, in my opinion, will face at some point also shoulder problems because they drop their elbow down, so the shoulder is turned in, and when then they want to catch it up again, they have to turn the shoulder out again. And usually that is the moment where usually problems happen. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but here you won't have it. You have you said it before, you're a sprinter, so you have a very I usually compare with Federer and Nadal. Nadal has this powerful forehand, and Federer has more the technical forehand. Both are equally good. So let's compare you and me. I mean, from the physiques, I would be more on Nadal, and you would be more on the Federer side. but from the swimming style we swim, I'm more on the Federer side, and you're more on the Nadal. I mean, just making a point to be there. But you will never have shoulder problems because now you will never have a problem where you're in a minus. I don't say you see your shoulder inverted, but you're still in the position to get this high elbow catch or high elbow with the green line at any any moment in time. It's like you can change this. Other people can, because usually what happens, you can make the same curve which the green is just mirrored to the other side, and there is usually where the other people have a problem. You know, when you draw you just mirror, you use your arm as the mirror, and you mirror to which the other side the movement. This is where usually people have their elbow. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah. And I think there's a couple of really good points there. One, swimmer shoulder problems are the most common injury in swimmers, and the shoulder joint is going to be increasingly closed down as we get more overhead and also internally rotate. So the more you can keep your arm, your hand below your shoulder. So even when I'm streamlining, if I can keep my hand below my shoulder, I'm less flexed. And if I can keep my hand shoulder width apart and also more square, I'm going to be less likely to pinch and close down on my shoulder, which we see sometimes when people are crossing midline, and also when they have more of a thumb entry, or their arm is too far overhead in their streamline, and that causes some problems. It's pinching down on those spaces and creating some of the impingement and the shoulder problems we see. And then a takeaway just from the two techniques, and then we'll pull up Marcus's video in a moment, is technique exists on a spectrum. So there's sometimes a lot of debate and argument over what's the most technically efficient stroke. But if we look at the world's fastest swimmers, most efficient from Ironman to 50-meter Olympic sprinters, there's a variety of techniques. They're going to fall within some principles and some parameters, but there's going to be a lot of different strategies based on different body types, different strengths, different weaknesses. And there's a couple of ways to get this job done. We just want to respect some of these global principles of biomechanics and drag forces and respecting how the body works. But using the tennis analogy, two world-class tennis players using different strategies, but both competing at a very high level and kind of going back and forth, in terms of number one and like who's the best player.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to jump over quickly to show you one of my videos, and then I think we can go more into detail there. I think
Great.
to actually look at the stroke itself again, and here we have also two beat kick like you have it. We have also the same position as you had before. What the difference is here, obviously, is that moment in time where we said about the high elbow catch. So what you will see is now is obviously the other hand is entering a bit earlier than on when you look at your video. That is also because the sequencing of your technique is a bit further apart. Like you would enter a bit later with your other hand, from what we saw. But the main point is now what I'm saying is I tilt my hand as first, and now what you will see is my elbow, as you explained it, goes up. And this will be the high elbow catch in that sense. You have now the ball here and would have a high elbow catch where we actually push that ball backwards all the way to the end. If we go back to it. I mean, we can also do it on the other side there as well. Have a high elbow catch. You can see it from the other side. And now it's actually how we want it to be, that you push everything backwards. This is more that movement. I think this is really the big difference between your technique and my technique. It's that the high elbow catch has a different meaning. For me, I need to have. I mean, I don't know how much is your maximum stroke rate, like the distance which you pass. I usually have 1.7 meters, 1.8, like 1 meter 80 centimeters, or something like that, which is an average of my stroke, which I do per stroke. And this is typically for me, as I try to optimize my stroke in way of saving energy. Whereas you obviously, as you explained, in the sprinter, you want to have more the forward propulsions, the torque, rather than the like the high elbow catch still, but you want to have rather the forwards more movement of it. I think making that point there.
Yeah, I mean, this couldn't be more of a classic textbook example of a high elbow catch. It's just really terrific for those of you who are wondering what it looked like. Marcus has an excellent high elbow catch, and even the timing of this, the timing is excellent. So it's something that I often try to teach my adult swimmers of waiting for the entry fingertips to enter and then setting catch with the opposite side and using catch and pull to accelerate the extension of your lead arm. So this is just a really terrific example in a freeze frame of where we catch both arms out in front at the same time. A big takeaway for everyone, and both Marcus and I both have this, is you always want one arm out in front streamlining, and you're using your pulling arm to help propel you through that streamline. You shape your vessel, you get into your streamline, and then your pulling arm is going to help you propel through that most efficient position. Marcus's timing here is impeccable. He waits for his entry hand to enter. He sets catch as soon as those fingertips enter. He gets his fingers down, his elbow up, and he catches that ball right away and uses his forearm as a paddle to drive water propulsively backwards, driving him forward. So just a really great example. And he's posted a lot of great content using this ball as an analogy and really sequencing and watching the ball being driven backwards the entire time. So very efficient stroke. It's something you could sustain for a very long time. He's doing a lot of half and full Ironman type of distances. And this is a stroke rate that you're going to be able to sustain in a very efficient way. We talked a little bit about leverage earlier before, but when you can effectively shorten your arm, you're able to create more power in a sustained way because it's easier to pull from this position than it is to pull when your arm is straight out. So in the case of my stroke technique, where we're seeing this straight arm pull, I'm able to create more torque and speed with that, but it's in an unsustainable way because it requires a lot more energy and a lot more effort, which I'm going to get in return in terms of short-term speed, but I'm just not going to be able to sustain it as long for like a 1.2 or a 2.4 mile swim.
I think that's the key point of it. I think that's the key point of the key difference between both our techniques. And I think actually it's a good thing that we are both so different, you know. Plus, also your way of explaining it makes it more scientific when it comes to the physiology of a human body. And there, I think Dan is really good at what he shows with his content on Instagram as well, on YouTube, where we actually have the two different techniques, although we have the same goal. And yes, what I think is very important, and what is very important to say here is, I think if I would sprint against him, I would lose out big time. If he would want to go and do a 1500 against me or even more. He would not big time, but he would struggle at some point. I guess this is the key takeaway. Both techniques are very efficient in their own sense, and this is a very big key takeaway of what we're doing here. I will never be able to move my arms with that kind of technique as fast as you will be able, or Dan will be able to move his arm. This is a big difference. So if you want to go, if your goal is to sprint, I think I would more go towards Dan's technique. If you want to have long distance race, you want to do channel crossings, I would tend to go more towards my technique. I think it's just an efficiency point of view. In terms of teaching and what we know about swimming, both of us, we have enough knowledge to know that both techniques need to be applied to certain ways. And this is just from the videos we've seen before. This is just your normal way, Dan's normal way of swimming. If he wants to go and do an open water swim or do the channel crossing from the English Channel from Dover to Calais, I think if you do it with me, he would apply more high elbow catch as well. I guess this is a given, I think. But again, as I said, high elbow catch is very important for me as a long distance swimmer in terms of getting the water early, have that roll up over the ball and pushing the water back. to have the maximum stroke or the maximum distance in your stroke on the water and the maximum pressure, and being more efficient. Again, it won't be sustainable on a sprint. I think that is I think the key takeaway of both of our techniques. I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So for those listening, your technique likely exists on a continuum of these two examples where maybe I wouldn't say Marcus and I are polar opposites, but we veer towards opposite sides of the spectrum, and your technique likely falls somewhere in between. And I would say with Marcus's example is it requires a tremendous amount of shoulder mobility, particularly getting it into internal rotation and being able to get your arm into that position out early, which adults in particular are lacking as they age if it wasn't something that you developed early on. So while yes, you can improve your high elbow catch, just be aware that it requires a lot of mobility and it requires a lot of patterning, a lot of adaptation, which is something that you can develop. But your technique's probably going to fall somewhere in between these two, and you ultimately want to find what works best for you. I think what would be interesting sometimes, Marcus, and we could do this next time I'm in Europe, is maybe we get together and we film some content live together and just kind of compare
Yeah.
our strokes, compare speeds. It could be fun to race a little, both on the short end and the long end. Um, I'm actually curious, how fast do you think you're moving here? You mentioned like meters per second with your stroke, but what would you say your 100-meter pace is with this technique and this example here?
This is 1:10, 1 minute 10 seconds on 100 meter this year. And yes, I agree with you. This shoulder mobility is very important, and I agree also to maybe see it side by side. That would be a really good thing when you're over in Europe. So we need to make that happen. And this technique can sustain. We try to do it in a endless pool. So I can sustain it until 105. So 105, there is the tipping point where I really would need to start to kick more and lose out a bit on the length of the stroke itself. If I swim 105 with that technique, it's also not that sustainable. 110, I can swim for hours.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, it looks super efficient. And that's an incredible time that I think a lot of people would aspire to be able to maybe even do once, let alone sustain. But you can just see the efficiency and your ability to be economical with that type of position allows you to sustain quite a fast swimming pace for a good amount of time.
I think key takeaway, and think what I actually take away with me is this analogy of the two tennis players and both playing on the same level, but actually having just different types of technique. But also the key takeaway for me for the session itself is what is possible. You need to go with every swimmer and every person you wanna coach. You need to go in what is possible, where you need to see. High elbow catch might be the desirable thing to do. As I said, at some point you need to start to make adjustments on shoulder mobility. Is it possible to do, and or is it not possible to do, and give reachable goals as such. This is, I think, my key takeaway, or something which we need to look into. And
yeah, so for those listening, I hope this gave you some things to think about, whether you didn't know what a high elbow catch was, or you didn't know where yours existed, or just some different examples. We hope this was useful. And if it was, give us a like, subscribe to our channels. Let us know what you think in the comments. Let us know how your high elbow catch is, what you think a high elbow catch is, ways that you've worked on it, things that you found to be successful. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we'd also love to know what you'd like to see more of. Marcus and I would like to hop on here more and do some more stroke analysis, talk swim, and maybe get a little duel in the pool going in Europe sometime soon, maybe this summer.
yeah, sounds like a plan.
Cool. Well, thanks, Marcus. Thanks for your time. This is great.
Thank you, Dan, very much. And yeah, subscribe and come back for our next session.
All right. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.